Good morning. Okay, we are about to begin TES, and I am so excited that you all could join us. So, I am welcome to honor you to the 2025 Center for Teaching Excellence's Teaching Effectiveness Symposium. The 2024 academic year has been one of reflection, innovation, and strategic transformation for our office. The continued growth and influence of generative AI has been a constant motivator and instigator of change and progress, as well as a source of uncertainty and anxiety to how best SMU can prepare our faculty and students to be on the cutting edge of those marvelous changes. Talking about these, taking all these challenges into consideration, Addie and I have reimagined the center's mission and programming to better serve our faculty with an increased sense of urgency. We have now included guiding principles in our mission statement, specifically curiosity, creativity, and real-world relevance. These principles are a concise way to foreground teaching excellence, and award-winning SMU faculties already offer this to their students. Nowadays, curiosity and experimentation are a must. Creativity is enhanced by all sorts of technologies, and real-world relevance is simply table stakes. We are inspired by your dedication to teaching, and as an organization, it is our privilege to showcase what you do. This year, we shifted from a traditional workshop-centered model to a more faculty-led initiatives, highlighting the expertise of our colleagues and ensuring diverse pedagogical voices are amplified across all CTE programming. This year we launched CTE Bites, which are short, 10 to 20 minutes, mini workshops designed to be integrated directly into department meetings that you guys already have. Available on demand, these sessions provide quick, targeted pedagogical support that meets faculty needs directly. And if you'd like to invite us, we are so happy and honored to come join you. These mini pedagogical bites are open to you guys. You have a menu of options that I put on this panel, but really anything goes. And again, as small as 10 minutes to as long as 30 minutes, whatever you guys wish. Okay, moving on. Furthermore, we've started the CTE Liaisons program, which I'm showcasing you right now, our current CTE Liaisons. These are 2 faculty members per department, and we have 10 departments selected per year. And our goal is that within 4 years, we will have gone through all departments on campus. These professors have been selected by their chairs, and they serve as teaching ambassadors to their departments.
There's 3 more. Just press 3 more times. There you go.
Thank you. Okay, so they attend CTE events. And you can see many of them with red shirts peppered throughout the room. They help shape departmental teaching, a departmental teaching plan, and they also serve on the new CTE advisory board. These are amazing faculty members, and we're so excited to work with them and extend the reach of the CTE in many departments across campus, which has been one of our biggest difficulties as a center. And then this year we have also launched a new CTE advisory board. This group of select faculty consists of Al Schuler, distinguished teaching professors, as well as our brand new CTE liaisons. They meet twice a year and review CTE programming and suggest changes and improvements. So welcome on board to both the CTE liaisons as well as the advisory board. Let's give them a quick round of applause. there's two more things I wanted to bring up. One was the CTE Passport, our micro-credentialing program. Continue to grow. This is what we use to track participation into CTE events, and we give visas and other kinds of stamps depending on the level of participation you do. However, this year, we've decided to make things a lot easier for you guys to access, and under our website you will find profile pages for all faculty where you can just click on a link and see your passport right there. Furthermore, we've decided to increase our faculty awards funds, and now all faculty awards have 2.5%, no, 250%, they've gone up quite a bit. Double and more. I can't do math on the spot. Anyway, we have increased these awards to match some of the finances and issues and other things going around. So we are very excited for this, and we thank the Provost Office for allowing us to do this and supporting us in this mission to recognize your amazing teaching efforts. Lastly, we've relaunched the CTE Book Club, and now every semester, in collaboration with faculty, we select timely books on pedagogy and educational technology to read, discuss, and apply. This semester, I'm pleased to announce this book, which is by Dr. David Yeager. This is called 10 to 25, The Science of Motivating Young People. And it is awesome, and we will hear about this in just a second, and it is authored by Dr. David Yeager, which will be our keynote speaker, and we'll hear from him in just a bit. Okay, we have just launched the annual report. Please check your emails. You should have received an email automatically nowish. We should have a link to it. Please check it, click it, see our annual report. It includes lots of information about what the center's been doing, who our award winners are, what you guys have been doing to make this university the best place to teach. We welcome Dr. Rachel Marzi to the stage.
Thank you, Konstantin. I'm going to admit now my wedding vows were shorter than that. And I've been married 24 years, so it's probably all worked out fine. I'm sorry for that long introduction. It just kept going at one point. Thank you. It was very generous. I thought, oh no, we've only covered the last 5 years. So I was really grateful when he said, and she spent 12 years at Northwestern. I thought that was going to speed it up a bit. But it is a pleasure to see all of you. I think the most important thing about the introduction, thank you to Konstantin for covering so much, is actually what the provost does. I can't tell you the number of times people say, I really understood what I did when I was a dean and have no idea what I do as a provost, and so the way I describe it is the deans report to me, and somehow that seems to satisfy people. But I think it's important to think about it in the context of what's happening here at SMU, particularly with the university's charge to R1 status. And I think as I joined the university, one of the things I'm particularly proud of is that the university achieved R1 status with not letting your foot off the gas of being great teachers. And I think that combination is really what's special in this SMU moment. How do we continue the academic ascent that this university has been on with a real focus on teaching at the undergraduate and graduate levels? That's not just about experiential learning and opportunities to go to Taos, but it's sometimes the hands-on experiences that faculty are able to offer in the Dallas community and elsewhere. Having been with you over the summer, it's definitely our study abroad programs. I mean, this is a truly international university when you see where students are studying. My first time here, one of the big scale differences between the University of Texas at Austin and SMU is I got a note about all the potentially impacted students when the tsunami happened. Do you remember the tsunami warning? So my phone started beeping overnight. We had a faculty member and a student in Japan at the time. We were able to get in touch with both of them and ensure their safety and security, and I turned to my husband. Remember, we've been married 24 years, so he wasn't totally irritated. And I woke him up and I said, you know, at Texas, I wouldn't have even known if I had students there. That's really, I think, one of the magical things about the touch that we have, that we're really connected, making sure not only that they're having incredible academic experiences, but they're safe and they're moving forward in their academic careers. So I really wanted to just spend a couple minutes talking about that academic ascent piece. I feel like that's really been the charge that Jay's asked of me and the board has asked of him. How do we think about accelerating who SMU is on the national and international stage from a research and creative professional perspective? So not just if you write articles and books, but if you produce theaters or films or op-eds or whatever your form of production is, how do we think about really being the wind at your back, continuing to attract outstanding faculty and support the faculty who are already here? And opportunities like this really allow me to think about that in the context of being great teachers. So I do encourage you to take advantage of the CTE opportunities that are offered throughout the year. I made a joke when the brand new faculty joined us, 3 days of orientation when I started my career at the University of Minnesota. 95% of it was about applying for external grants. I still have the notebooks. So 5% was about teaching, service, being a good citizen. 95% was about training on how to be a better grant getter. And I think I'm proud to work at a place that's turned that on its head, even as we consider continue our research ascent. I'm also excited. I know there's going to be a long introduction, David, just so you're prepared. But I'm also happy to mention, while we're here, I had the opportunity to hear David speak when I was still at UT. And one of the things I think that's really special about having David Yeager here today is not just that we happen to have a connection. He committed to this long before I was coming to, and he just told me he committed to this long before Jay was even coming. So you know how long this has been on the books. But I think David is a true exemplar of the intersection we're talking about. What does it mean to be an outstanding researcher with highly impactful work that's influencing how companies, schools, families are thinking about raising young people and being a great teacher? And so it's not just about the research he's going to talk to you about today, but I think, David, thank you for being such an example of that strong intersection of how we take our research into the classroom and makes us better for who we are. I'm glad you're here to share your wisdom. I will admit that I'm not going to be able to stay to hear it because I have to go welcome the first year students after this. So if you'll forgive me, I have read the book. I do recommend it, and I'm really grateful you all are here. I look forward to working with you throughout the years. And just remember, all the deans report to the provost, and it feels like we'll all be okay. Thank you so much. Good luck to you.
Well, thank you very much, Rachel. That was wonderful. Hi, guys. I haven't introduced myself. I started just blabbering and walking here. I'm Addie Tolliver. I'm the Associate Director for the Center for Teaching Excellence. And I'm very excited to talk to you a little bit about our programs. So as you will see right now, there's a QR code in your screen. You guys are going to be busy. That's just something that happens. I invite you to scan this code right now and just peruse through the offerings that we have this semester. We have great programs this semester, and I highly encourage you to register for these programs now that your schedules might be a little bit open, and just put it on your calendar and see if you can attend. All of our workshops are done in person in Ford Hall, room 124, but we also offer them hybrid, so you can attend in Zoom if you cannot attend in person, so we try to make it as convenient as possible. We also try to record all of our sessions, and they're available on YouTube. So I highly encourage you to go there now, see what is currently in our programs. I'm going to talk a little more in detail about some of these programs, but so I hope to see you this semester. So one of the things that Constantine mentioned in his introduction is that we have several initiatives happening. We have an initiative called the CTE Affiliates. So these are faculty members that propose certain workshops, and they present one workshop a month on a topic that is of interest to faculty. So we got our CTE liaisons to actually pick our faculty affiliates for the year. But I want to recognize our fall 24 CTE affiliates, which were Dr. Alita Lieberman from philosophy and Dr. Laurie Stevens, and our spring 2025 faculty affiliates, which were Pilar Megorejo and then Janice Lindstrom. Janice, I saw you, and she is in crutches. I do have a little a certificate of recognition and appreciation for her. Do not come to stage. I saw the crutches. I'll go to you. I got you. But I want to recognize and thank them for being a part of the CTE leadership. If you visit the CTE YouTube page, you will see the recordings of their workshops, and I highly encourage you to do so. Now, we also would like to introduce our wonderful Fall 2025 affiliates. So I have Gabriella, do you mind standing? From World Languages, yeah, welcome, yeah. And we have Dawn. Dawn, are you here already? Dawn is right there, so welcome, Dawn. So we have outstanding workshops in the books for you guys. So some of Gabriella's topics are writing and teaching philosophy for your students, helping students and ourselves feel better about AI, designing assignments that resist AI misuse, and beyond the door, transforming office hours into student success zones. And then for Dawn's, we have proven teaching practices for motivation, which is going to piggyback with some of our conversations today, learning with great video content, PowerPoint, the good, bad, and the useful, and writing and teaching you with case studies. So Michael Brown, remember we're talking about case studies? So finally we have a session on that. That's wonderful. We also have a book discussion, and we're going to be discussing David's book, 10 to 25. We have 2 cohorts meeting. So the book has actually 3 sections, and we have 2 cohorts meeting. We're trying to offer at different times so people can attend in different days and times. Right now, we have 20 copies of the book available for everybody. The libraries, thank you SMU libraries, they did acquire electronic copies and physical copies for you. But if you want a free copy, you can use this QR code, and you can sign up for attending. And if you lead at least one of the sessions, just co-lead and facilitate one of the sessions, you get a free copy. So visit this QR code, and we can also share this later with everybody via email. But the first 20 people to sign up will get copies of the book, and we're just asking you to co-facilitate one of the sessions. By co-facilitating, I mean come up with discussion questions or the activities that will happen in that session. It's not a huge ask. So we would love for you to sign up. And if you are just attending the session, but you might not make it in one of the days, you can attend the other session. We just want you to be there for the 3 sessions. So Constantine mentioned our initiative called the CTE Passport. And hopefully by now you're familiar with it. This is going to be the 4th year they're entering using the CTE passports. And it functions like a passport. Every time that you attend a CTE event, you get a student visa. So you get a student visa on your passport, and you get a stamp for the event with the date that you attended. If you present a CTE workshop, which we would love for you guys to present one, anytime you can volunteer to present on a topic of your choice, you can earn a work visa and then a stamp on your passport under your work visa. If you attend an event that is not hosted by CTE anywhere else, you earn a tourist visa, and then you get a stamp on your passport. So the good things that we have worked on with the provost office is that if you're teaching a professional faculty, this can be used for your promotion guidelines. So that's where we really want to incentivize, but we also recognize and acknowledge your professional development efforts. So if you go to the CTE website, which is this URL that's on the screen that I'm not going to read, you'll see that there's a directory for every year. For the past 3 years, we've had a directory, and you can just find your name, and this is a digital little passport that you can see the little, leaves like moving. It's kind of cool. So I encourage you to visit that website and check out your passport. Now, when you attend a lot of workshops, you become a CTE frequent flyer. So yay, get it? All the analogies? So we would love to acknowledge our 24-25, the last year's frequent flyers. So to get started, we have Dr. Denise Dupont from World Languages. She is not here today, but she's here in spirit. We have Patty Taylor. So Patty, where are you? Congratulations, Patty. So I have a little something. I have a goodie bag for you. I will just come to you. Just let me know where you are so I can just, go. But Patty's sitting right there, so congratulations. We also have AJ Meyer from math. So I see you right there. Congratulations, AJ. We have Cheryl Mendenhall on the same table, which is going to make things easier for me to bring your goodies. And then we have Emily right here, Dr. Emily Nems-Chastain from Perkins. Now, we do have an honorable mention, and I'll tell you why. because we had to do the annual report and close it early and have these numbers, I closed it and I was not able to add this person who also became one of the frequent flyers. So I told her, say, hey, technically you are one of the frequent flyers, but we had to send the annual report to the printer. We had to get stuff done. So I want to recognize Margot Habibi from journalism. She's an adjunct professor, and she, like, in the past 2 weeks, been working on her course design, so we're meeting like crazy. So that's a great effort from her. So just look at her face. She is also in the Bush Center. So, and then I would like to welcome to the stage David Tillicky. This year we partner with the Disabilities Accommodations and Success Strategies Office, the DAS office, to showcase a wonderful recognition, the Extra Mile Award. For that, I would like to invite David, and he's a senior learning specialist at DAS. He dedicated his career to supporting higher education students with disabilities and served in several roles.
Thanks so much, Adi, for helping us to make this happen today. I'm very happy to be here with you all. Let me get my notes. It's like a security blanket. Students for New Learning is where this started. That's a student group that I oversee through the DAS office. It's chartered by Student Senate and provides support and networking opportunities to our neurodivergent students on campus. And I'll define that. That's students with ADHD, learning differences, and students on the autism spectrum. So since 2008, Students for New Learning, or SNL as we call it, has chosen 49 deserving faculty members who are recognized for their excellent teaching for those who learn differently. Funding and support for this award are provided by the President's Commission on the Needs of Persons with Disabilities, reflecting how much SMU values faculty sensitivity to students with learning differences. So other than outstanding teaching techniques and making sure that accommodations are provided, what does it take to receive this Extra Mile Award? This year's recipient is the 50th recipient of this award, Dr. Bruce Levy. He was described by his students as patient, fair, understanding, welcoming, honest, and engaging. We're sure that he exhibits these exemplary traits with all of his students, but they are especially appreciated by us. Dr. Levy wasn't able to be here with us this morning, unfortunately, but I will present this award to him personally later this afternoon.
All right. Thank you so much. I'd love 2 or 3 volunteers, or, I teach freshmen. I'm happy to volunteer you to share your answers. So either you guys were having great answers to the question or discussing what you did this summer. Either way, it's great. But yeah, let's have 3 volunteers, if you don't mind. Yes?
Given that young people are overwhelmed, the best way to motivate them is to inspire.
All right, overwhelmed, inspire. All right, thank you.
Given that they have shorter and shorter attention spans, the best way to motivate them is to give them hands-on assignments, activities.
All right, short attention spans, hands-on assignments. Yeah.
Given that young people are curious, provoke curiosity.
All right, there we go. Yes, one more.
Given that young people are anxious, help them feel safe in their learning and have clear expectations.
All right, anxious, help them feel safe, etc. Okay, great. I see a lot of truth and validity in every one of those answers. I'll tell you, as I've been on the road, I tend to hear answers that cluster into a few different boxes. So when I speak to corporate audiences, the kind of C-suite folks who think about the next generation, their answer is, given that young people are selfish, short-sighted, kind of wimps who need coddling and complain about everything and demand to have a vacation on the first day of work, etc. The best way to motivate them is to threaten or control them with strong extrinsic incentives, nanny cams, monitors, kind of tools of external control. It's kind of how a lot of corporate America thinks about the next generation. You talk to parents. Parents are like, given that young people are overly stressed, hyper anxious, traumatized, damaged by COVID, overwhelmed, etc. The best way to motivate them is to protect them from all distress and discomfort, build their confidence step by step, prevent them from, falling apart like a house of cards, etc. Okay. We talked to K-12 teachers. They're hilarious. Like, given that young people are the glowing lights of our nation's future, what's going to motivate them is to draw out the wonderful, inspiring uniqueness of every child. And so they're very optimistic. But the reason I bring this up is that I want to illustrate the point that when you look at how any organization deals with young people or any individual interacts with them, you can say, well, that's not effective or that's more effective, right? And you can argue about pragmatics, but ultimately what's driving a lot of what people are doing is their personal theory, their like implicit belief system about young people. And it makes sense to have an overly coercive, controlling, almost authoritarian system if you think that young people are incorrigible, short-sighted problems that need to be managed, right? If you think that they're like a dangerous tool that's about to explode, then it makes sense to protect themselves and the world from that disaster, okay? And if you think that they're damaged goods, then it makes sense to prevent them from becoming even more damaged, okay? And so a lot of the debates about the best way to teach this or that, I think are arguing about pragmatics when really often the issue is what do we fundamentally believe about young people and what they're capable of. And if we don't come to a consensus about what our young people are capable of, then we can end up with kind of very incoherent set of policies, rules, strategies, etc. And this, I think, comes to a head in several frustrating dilemmas that bother many of us as educators. I'll just share one example. So my best friend growing up in Sugar Land, Texas, is a guy named Alex Sweeney. He is an ENT surgeon now. He's the head of ENT surgery at Baylor. He specializes in base of the skull surgery. So if you have cancer, like in a nerve in your neck, right, he's a good person to go to. But his bread and butter is installing cochlear implants. So if you're deaf, then he can install this thing, and through electrical signals, it can restore hearing. So like that story again, he performs biblical miracles as his regular day job, right, restoring hearing. And yeah, he came to me with a challenge. And the challenge was that when he would be doing the rounds after a shift at Ben Taub Hospital, which is the county hospital in Houston, then he would give feedback to the medical residents and say, you should have done this assessment, you should have asked this question, you should have made that diagnosis. And for a subset of the residents, it's like in one ear, out the other, right? They might nod, but then they come back to the next shift and nothing has changed. And the irony is, right, he can make people hear, but he can't make his own residents listen, right? And it's a version of what we call the mentor's dilemma. And the mentor's dilemma is simply the idea that it's very hard to simultaneously criticize someone and motivate them. And it's a dilemma because it doesn't feel like there are any good options. One option is be hypercritical but crush someone's spirit. And the other option is withhold feedback and have them like you, but now you haven't educated. And for us as experts in our disciplines, like our role is to help novices become more expert. And we know the only way that novices can become expert, of course, is to try the hard things that are required of that expertise and then fumble through them and get feedback and then try again, right? That critical feedback is a key part of the journey from novice to expert. And so it's a real challenge for us in the core of what we do, right? And it feels like we either have to choose the rigor of our discipline or the emotional well-being of our students, for many of us. And for him, certainly, right? He's a leader. He was the quarterback at Penn. He fits all the stereotypes for leadership in our culture, and yet he really wants to have a great next generation of doctors who can save lives. And it's not just in medicine. You see this in a lot of other disciplines. When I give a talk to law firms, they come up and the partners say, look, we get these junior associates, we spend all this money wooing them from their top law firms, and they show up, and then they file their first brief, and they're like, this is ready for the Supreme Court. And we say, no, it's absolutely not ready for the Supreme Court. What are you talking about? There's a huge difference between impressing a professor with your writing and impressing a judge. And so the junior associates are constantly getting critical feedback, and they interpret a brief covered in comments as a sign that the partner thinks they'll never one day make a partner. And the partner's like, I bill at $1,000 an hour. This was $3,000 worth of feedback that I just gave you. Like, that's how much I believe in you, right? I didn't even start over. Like, I used your thing and I revised it. And you're getting free coaching, right? It's going to help you the rest of your life, right? So there's a huge mismatch between the perception of the feedback recipient and the feedback giver. And this conflict comes up again and again. So what's happening for this kind of thing? Now, a lot of people want to look at very recent developments and use those as explanations for limitations in the next generation. But for me as a developmental psychologist, I try to look at kind of the ontology of the human species and like how did we get to the point where we got? And if you look at babies, what you realize is that babies love learning. Like from birth, every typically developing baby on the planet has the machinery required to learn the complexities of grammar and syntax and causality and mind reading, often by the age of 1, right? And they'll learn all of those things without doing a single worksheet or getting a sticker chart or getting a grade, right? They do it because understanding and predicting the world feels amazing. Or the other way of saying it is being unable to interact with or predict or understand the world is terrifying. And the desire to reduce that existential terror, right, is a pretty strong motivator from birth for kids to struggle through difficulty, look for patterns, understand despite confusion, right? And it's not just in intellectual things, in motor things too. So like a typically developing baby will take a couple steps, maybe and fall, and then get back up, right? But the baby doesn't fall and then say, oh, I guess I'm not a walker, right? But then students come to our classes, like computer science class, I'm not a programmer, I'm not a creative person, right? I'm not an artist, right? They interpret struggle as a sign of a global, fixed, permanent identity. But that is not the state of human nature. That is not how human beings evolved in the savannah hundreds of thousands of years ago, right? Like, can you imagine, like, surviving in the savannah if, like, we were like, oh, I guess I'll never eat, because I missed through this spear, didn't hit the woolly mammoth. I guess I'll be hungry. It's like, no, there would be no human beings if that was our response, right? And not only that, but adolescents in particular played a large role in the survival of the human race, right? They were the roving bands, like, protecting from warring tribes and also, gathering protein for the tribe, etc. Child rearing at a very young age. Like if adolescents just gave up when things were hard, there's no way we would have civilization, right? So in our culture, something is like, rather than thinking of young people as inherently either like lazy or selfish or short-sighted, I like to think of them as having been influenced by a culture that has masked this natural level of learning that human beings have as our birthright. Because we know that now in our modern culture, something has changed. You've gone from this wonder and love of learning and challenge to this disaffection, disengagement, right? And if we're being honest, continues for many of us into our professional lives, right? So what's happening? Now it's easy to blame COVID, obviously is a big deal, right? It's easy to blame social media, right? But the problem is if you blame something that happened in the last 5, 10, or 15 years, you look for solutions that are limited to the last 5, 10, or 15 years. But if the problem is something that's been going on throughout all of human history, then you will only end up with superficial solutions, right? And in fact, you can look throughout recorded history and see adults complaining about young people. Here's Aristotle in the Rhetoric. The young people are in character, prone to desire, and ready to carry any desire they may have formed into action. They're fickle in their desires, which are as transitory as they are vehement. Basically, teenagers are the worst, right? I mean, Shakespeare says, like, would that there was no age between 10 and 20. Basically, lock them in a closet for a decade. Get them out of here. Right? I mean, you could have read this in the Wall Street Journal op-ed section yesterday. It would not be weird. And just in general, we've adopted a language as a society that's very pejorative for young people. Right? If anyone here has kids, if you have a baby, so you have a 6-month or 9-month-old, and you're in public, like, how do people react? Like, oh my God, look at that baby. I want 9 of those. That's the best. It's so adorable. If you have a teenager, they're like, you're doing the Lord's work. Right? Or in Dallas, they're like, God bless you. Bless your heart. Right? Like, you're pity. I mean, when I was a middle school teacher, my wife was a social worker, we all worked with teenagers all day long. And everyone's like, what is wrong with you people? Like, you're lunatics. Right? And so, like, it can't be that an entire developmental stage that is crucial for the survival of the human race is completely worthless. Right? It's got to be that we don't have a good way of thinking about it. Now, for a long time, people didn't really know how to deal with babies, at least in modern culture. Right? I mean, until attachment theory, we didn't realize babies need to be swaddled with their mom. Right? I mean, like, traditional societies knew this, but like post-industrial societies have forgotten this traditional wisdom. Right? But now you have a baby, and you do, I don't know if you guys remember that, if you saw this video, the 5 S's, Harvey Karp. Any parents watch this video? Yeah, okay. One of them is shake the baby, and you're like, definitely do not shake the baby. But swaddle, shush, those are all good ones. But like, baby's crying, you're like, diaper, swaddle, nap, right, or food. It's like, that's your checklist. It's pretty easy. But if you don't know that, you're like, what is happening? I cannot fix this baby. But the minute they're teenagers, we don't have the checklist. We're just like, they're a bad kid, right? Or I'm a bad parent. Now, a lot of young people are actually tired and hungry. So, like, some of those things are the same thing. They do have to go to the bathroom. But like, what's the equivalent of swaddling, sleeping, etc. for an adolescent as it is for a baby? And that's kind of what our psychological research is trying to do. Trying to figure out what is that missing need that we're failing to meet, and then how do we more systematically meet it in a way where we have thriving, eager, enthusiastic young people who are ready to learn and take on a challenge, right? Just like a baby refreshed from a nap, ready to go out and take on the world. All right. We did an experiment to try to go in this direction, and it's an experiment on how to give critical feedback. In this study, this was conducted with Jeff Cohen, who was one of my mentors at Stanford, and Valerie Purdy-Greenaway, who's in the business school at Columbia, and several others. And in this study, we had 7th graders write a first draft essay about their heroes in life. And these are real, it wasn't a lab study, it was in a real 7th grade classroom. And the teachers provided feedback the way they normally do. So they would put positive comments on it, like say, good job, and they would give critical feedback, okay? In their minds, they're doing what you might call the compliment sandwich, right? Compliment sandwich is basically like, I love your enthusiasm. All of your work is garbage and has to change. But thanks for turning it in on time, right? And in the speaker's mind, it's like I said, more positive than negative, right? And it's like, oh, mental math. Everyone can do mental math. Like 2 is greater than 1. So it's like net positive, for sure, right? But listeners who are in a kind of status ambiguity where there's a disparity in power between the speaker and the listener, they're paying attention to potentially threatening information, right? Because it's a kind of survival mechanism. So you're paying attention to something that could mean that this person with power over you thinks poorly of you, right? And being complimented for being on time or enthusiastic is not really relevant to the task at hand. The task at hand is what's the substance of your writing and thinking. And so if the criticism is only about the substance and the praise is for something that's not the substance, right? Then like you would be concerned that the person thinks poorly. Like if the dean visited your class and they were like, I love how you had chairs in the room. Your lecture was a mess and totally pointless, but thank you for having a syllabus. You'd be like, my dean thinks I'm a bad teacher. That would be your conclusion. And yet in our minds, we convince ourselves that the compliment sandwich works. Like, people are so confident, right? But it doesn't address the existential fear that someone has when someone with power over them critiques the core of their work. So we decided to try an alternative, which is something we call wise feedback, which is basically to take the unspoken intentions of the instructor and make them transparent. And what do instructors intend? What instructors intend is to provide critical feedback at the right time to help a novice become more of an expert. That I believe in you so much that I'm giving you my best comments. That's what most people think when they're critiquing work. And so we just tried to make that clear. And we did that by having teachers handwrite Post-it notes that they put in stacks before students got their essays back. And then we, the researchers, intercepted the essays after they were graded, put either treatment or control Post-it notes on it, and then we put the notes back in the envelopes, and then the teachers then handed the envelopes back to the students. And in the treatment group, the note said this. It said, I'm giving you these comments because I have high standards, and I know that you can meet them. Note that there's no puff up, there's no self-esteem pat on the back, there's no, trophy, right? It's not like, oh, you're the greatest, I love you. Like it's I'm taking you seriously. That's why I'm holding you to the standard. But also, I wouldn't be doing this, it implies, if I didn't think that with the right support, you were capable of meeting that standard. So yeah, it's positive, but it's an implied compliment. It's not direct praise or a puff up, right? And the idea is that the appeal to the standard addresses concerns about bias. This person's biased against me, that's why they're pointing this out. And then the assurance of the student's ability to meet it assures them that this is for them. It's not just a standard for anybody, it's something that you personally, in my opinion, can do. The note didn't say wise feedback, that's just for you, the viewer of this study. And the dependent measure was, did they turn in the revised essay a week later? Okay. And that, of course, matters because if you're grading essays and then half the time students don't even turn a revised essay, right, that's infuriating as an instructor. What we found is that with the wise feedback note, students were twice as likely to turn in the revised essay, went from 40% to 80%. And think about that black bar on the left, right? So of 100% total, 60% of the time, students looked at their comments and said, okay, no thanks, I'm good. I'm not going to revise this. Right? I mean, what a waste. When I was a middle school teacher, I would grade all day on Sundays. And then I would come back on Mondays and hand the essays out. But the grading was miserable, for me at least. And what got me through it was the belief that my students would be so grateful that they're getting this high-level feedback. That they're going to look at the essays, cover the comments, and be like, thank you. And carry me out on their shoulders like Robin Williams at the end of Dead Poets Society. But that's not what happened. Instead, my students were like, Mr. Yeager is such a jerk that he spends his weekends making teenagers cry. That's what they thought. Right? So my default, before we did this research, was on the left. But then with the wise feedback note, students implemented twice as much of the feedback. So the teacher's job is more efficient, students are learning more, and everyone's lives are better. I mean, if twice, I have 4 kids, if twice as many of my kids listen to me the first time, then at least 2 out of my 4 kids would have pants on by the time they needed to go to school. And that would be great. But interestingly, we also found a pretty striking reduction in the achievement gap. So half of students were white in this study, half of students were black, and all the teachers were white. And what we found is that in historical data, like prior to the experiment, black students had greater distrust of teachers for a good reason. And the reason was that only black students had ever been disciplined for defiance or disobedience in the school. So if a kid talked back to a teacher and it was a white kid, teachers were like, cut it out. And if it was a black kid, they were like, go to the office. So students knew that criticism from teachers was often coming from an unfair, potentially biased place. And that spilled over to criticism on their essays. Students get an essay back covered in comments, instead of saying, oh great, look at all the things I can fix. It's more like, here we go again. Like yet another sign of mistreatment. What the wise feedback did is it clarified, at least for this circumstance, that this is a place in which you can trust that you're being cared for and taken seriously. This is a place where you can be vulnerable enough to grow and improve. So what's happening here? Let me give you 100 years of developmental science in one slide. And so if there's any emergencies, people have to leave, there's a fire alarm, you'll at least get the main points. I made that joke 3 weeks ago, and then literally on this slide, a fire alarm was pulled. We had to wait outside for 45 minutes. They're like, you jinxed it. The punchline is, adolescents' brains and hormones make them hypersensitive about status. Their reputations, their prestige, etc., how they look to others, how they feel about themselves socially. And that sensitivity increases the fear of failure, of mistakes, of basically publicly revealing any inadequacy in your reputation. Now, many adults think of that and say, oh, teenagers are frivolously seeking status. They care about likes on Instagram, and they change their clothes every day. I think of it a little differently. I don't think of it as frivolous. I think of it as a deep-seated motivation to learn how to be socially successful in a complex, subtle world. And furthermore, I think, because young people can do that, then that helps themselves and humanity survive. So again, think about our evolutionary history, right? If your social reputation doesn't matter when you're a child, right? If you're 3, parents are like, why didn't you kill a mastodon today? Right? It's like you expect to take care of a 3-year-old, right? You don't value a 3-year-old for the calories that they brought to the tribe, for example, right? But if you're 16 and you're sitting there like a lump on a log, like at some point someone's like, I'm not going to protect you from this other, warring tribe. I'm not going to bring you meat. I'm not going to watch out for you when you sleep. Like, you're not doing anything for us. So being viewed as socially incompetent would affect the judgments of the rest of the group and maybe lead you to be exiled for the group or just left behind. But if you're alone in the wild 200,000 years ago, you die, right? You die alone. Right? There's no caves to sleep in. You're on the ground. Animals can get you, right? You can't protect yourself. So another way to say, being viewed as socially worthless is death for adolescents, right? In a way that's not true for children. And so if you are unconcerned with impressing the other people who would judge you as socially valuable, then that's not a very good survival strategy. That's the argument, at least. And I think there's some validity to this, that although things have changed now with respect to safety and food and calories and things like that, it's still true that it's really critical for young people to learn how to be socially successful, because the rules of the labor market and of being successful in life, they're changing so fast, and they're changing faster than adults can keep track of them. Just to put this in like a concrete way, just dating, right? So you'd think, okay, I have 2 teenagers now, maybe I'm a good source of advice on dating. I'm a terrible source of advice. I've been out the dating market for 22 years. Like, what do I know, right? And we actually just finished a study. We tested dating scenarios where we had moms answer or have ChatGPT answer. And moms are like a half standard deviation worse, right? Because they're like, oh, honey, this or that. And then ChatGPT's like, if someone likes when you swipe this, here's what it means. Like, the modern society changes so fast. It's very hard to stay up to date. And so we are often, as adults, not credible authorities on certain things. I don't know if anyone's had this experience. A student comes to you, they're like, I love your class, I want to do this, but in industry and a job. And I'm like, I've never had a job. Like, why are you asking me what kind of job? Like, I stayed in school forever. Like, and now I have a job where I literally can't be fired unless I do something illegal. Like, I'm a terrible source of advice for career stuff, right? I mean, of course, I give them all the advice that they want, right? But like, this idea that just because we're old and successful, given what was the status criteria when we were young, doesn't mean we are credible authorities on status criteria right now. And so young people, every generation, have to figure that stuff out for themselves. There's no manual or checklist or rule book that anyone can give them. They have to just be great at reading the room, as it were. And that means they got to pay attention to details, they got to remember negative things, remember positive things. And so, given that, it makes sense that in adolescence, as pubertal maturation happens, specifically the gonadal axis, which increases testosterone, estradiol, etc., it sensitizes the brain to social learning experiences. And it creates even what's been called one-trial learning. So the one way to illustrate this is, many of you can think back on a time when you were younger and someone humiliated you or falsely accused you or made you feel ashamed, right? Made you feel like you're a nothing or a nobody. Many people can think back on that in the pit of their stomachs and remember how that felt. And not only that, many people can picture exactly where they were, what the topic was, what the context was, maybe even the date. Right? That's an example of one-trial learning. Another example is a time when you were young and someone believed in you. Maybe treated you like you were more than you thought you were. Thought that you had more potential than you thought. That also is really memorable. And so what we argue is that the brain's trying to learn a lot about how to avoid socially catastrophic experiences like shame and humiliation, and how to approach socially positive experiences like pride and admiration. And that helps young people to develop and transition successfully into adult society. And once we understand that, then it's possible to start thinking about a lot of what happens in education, especially formal education, through this lens, right? So a student answering a question in class. Call them a student, they raise their hand. Seems simple. From a pure information transfer perspective, it's like, we are experts. We ask a question to figure out what they don't understand. We ask a follow-up to make sure we understand it. And then we tell them the information that they need. And now I've transferred expertise from expert to novice, right? But viewed from this lens, though, it's a little different. It's like, teacher says, are there any questions? Student looks around. No one else raises their hand. Well, but I do have a question, but no one else has raised their hand. So it must be that everyone else understands it, but I don't. So the fact that everyone else understands it and I don't means, am I in the wrong class? Was I not paying attention? If I wasn't paying attention, did I do something wrong? Right? Am I not being serious? Do I not care about school? Right? These are all legitimate questions. And on top of that, what are students used to when they ask a question that everyone else knows the answer to? Think about that. Like, may not be in your classes, but in high schools in America, we've done these studies. If a student asks a question, there's 30 kids in the class. One kid has a question, 29 do not. How does the teacher respond? What's the typical way a teacher responds to a kid who asks a question that everyone else knows the answer to? The typical way they respond is, I already explained that. It was super clear. We just talked about it. You did 3 worksheets on it, and it was also in the homework. So the fact that you don't know the answer to this question means you weren't listening or paying attention or being serious when I was being super clear. And the fact that you weren't listening or paying attention means you don't really care about your learning and you're screwing around. So get your life together, stop screwing around, and go do this stuff that I already gave you, and then I'll talk to you. So that's 50% of American public school teachers in our studies. That's their response to a student mistake. And you talk to them and they're like, I am teaching them responsibility and accountability. Because the world is harsh and it demands leadership and accountability, and these kids are coddled and they need someone to take them seriously. So like, that's the narrative from teachers. But then the kid's like, I just don't understand logarithms. I don't know why you make a big deal about it. Like, now it's a moral problem for me? Like, logarithms are hard, right? So even if you were a great, warm, supportive, super teacher, that's what students have experienced for 12 years before they come to your class. That's in their mind when they're like, any questions? No one else raises their hand. Am I going to be the one to ask the question that everyone already knows the answer to? Absolutely not. It makes no sense for a young person to do that. So then the student doesn't raise their hand. And then the teacher is like, man, I must have explained that well. No questions. I'm crushing it. Move on. To build on what I just said. Nobody understood what you just said. But you're building on it because you're like, no questions. Right? And then you're like, all right, guys, maybe you don't get it, but come to office hours. Like, are they going to go to office hours? And then, like, what's their imagination of office hours? It's professor saying, why are you wasting my time in office hours when I'm supposed to be answering emails or working to ask me a question about something I already explained clearly in the assignments? Right? And so your irresponsibility is ruining my afternoon. And because of that, the implication is, I'm going to be harsh when I grade your stuff. It's like, why would a student ever go to office hours if that's their imagination of the scenario, right? So again, it's easy as professors to say, I gave a great lecture, no one had questions, nailed it. No office hours, awesome, got free time, also, must have nailed it, right? 30% of my students failed. I guess they're in the wrong class. I don't know what to do about that, but that's a bummer. But nobody really cares. No one's going to talk to me about it. As long as I have a bell curve, it's fine, right? Maybe it's just UT talking. I don't know. But like, that's the attitude, you know? And so it's easy for us to individualize the failures of the 30% of students who get a C or below, as they never asked for help, they didn't ask any questions, they weren't engaged, they didn't care, right? But from the student's perspective, like hundreds of thousands of years of social evolution of the human race is like involved in the fear of humiliation from outing themselves as incompetent publicly in front of a power figure and their peers, right? So that's kind of what we're talking about. Now, what works better? How can you communicate to young people to address this? What doesn't work is what I call grown-splaining. And I'm now going to mansplain grown-splaining to you. So this is very simply the idea that we think, oh, I, with my smart adult brain, am going to explain the smart stuff that I know to your dumb teenage brain, who's short-sighted, impulsive, inexperienced, etc. And if only you would listen to me, then you would make smart, great choices for your future. And if you don't listen to me, then it's because you don't care, you're not listening, and you lack character, right? It's like we talk to young people the way Americans speak in foreign countries when they don't speak the language. You know, you just yell English louder. You know, like, where's the Eiffel Tower? It's like, that's not helping anybody, right? And so, unfortunately, this doesn't work. And there's a nice little study to illustrate a version of this. So a friend of mine, Ron Dahl, was on an R01 with Jennifer Silk, who's a wonderful neuroscientist at the time at Pitt. They had a parent R01 about maternal depression, but as a part of this, they're like, hey, we're bringing teenage girls into the lab, and we've got the moms. So they took advantage of the situation and ran a study to test a very simple question. What happens in the teenage brain when your mom is nagging you? All right? So they had the moms pre-record themselves nagging the daughters. And then the daughters come in the lab, and they're in the big fMRI machine, and they're listening on audio to their mom's nag them. And this article is hilarious to me because it's like all acronyms and highly technical tables, but in the middle of it is this quote from the materials. This is a real thing a mom said to a real daughter in the study. One thing that bothers me about you, it's like we're off to a bad start already there, is that you get upset over minor issues. I could tell you to take your shoes from downstairs. You'll get mad that you have to pick them up and actually walk upstairs and put them in your room. You'll get mad if I tell you that your room is a little dirty and it just needs sweeping and dusting. You get upset if your sisters want to do something that you don't agree on, but 3 of them do, and you don't want to do it. You get upset too easily, and you just need to calm that down. All right. I'll tell you what did not ever happen in this study. So 0% of the time were the teenage participants like, you know, Mom, you have a point. I'm really glad you had this list of things I can work on. See where you're coming from. And in fact, I've already started making plans for how to change. So I'll report back soon. Good chat. And I'll let you know how it goes. So that never happened in this study. Instead, what you see is basically strong negative emotion and very little thinking about how to change. So in the top right, you see increases in the affective regions of the brain. It's loosely interpreted as they're pissed off. The middle is dorsolateral prefrontal cortex. So this is like the planning and goal-directed behavior region of the brain. So they're not planning, they're thinking ahead. It's like a nagging-induced frontal lobotomy you could think about in the middle. In the bottom right is the temporoparietal junction. This is the region of the brain related to social perspective taking. So this is like mind reading, right? And that's important because a lot of what happens for students, you know, parent-child, they're asked to do things in subtle, implicit ways. We're not actually as direct as we think we are. And that causes miscommunication problems. We think we've been clear and they haven't interpreted it that way. So if you remember what I just read, most adults think the mom said clearly to clean your room. But read it again. You'll get mad if I tell you that your room is a little dirty. Right? Read literally, the teenager could be like, yeah, I get mad. It's because you say it in a mean way. Right? It just needs sweeping and dusting. I guess my room does. I wonder who's going to do that. Right? Those are literal responses to this. The mom doesn't say, clean your room, but the mom might have thought she did. But this could have been dads and sons, by the way. This happened to be moms and daughters, or any other combination. But like, the kid hears one thing, and then the mom or dad is like, I told you to clean your room. And the kid's like, no, you didn't. And the parent's like, stop, pushing back against me. And the kid's like, who's this lunatic yelling at me? Right? It's like we say one thing, they hear another, and then there's a fight over the misinterpretation. And we just keep thinking, if only we can dominate or be powerful enough or have strong enough consequences or threaten enough or talk about the long-term benefits enough, if we could make it powerful enough, then they'll be motivated. But the problem isn't that the long-term outcomes they're thinking about or the disappointment of their parent. It's that it's humiliating to be talked to like this. And so you've basically switched off the primary driving motivation for a young person. And we do this a lot. I mean, we do a lot of work in ninth grade math classrooms. And there's not picking on math, it's just a big dividing class for high schoolers. But teachers will say, look, you've got to do this homework and get an A and learn how to factor trinomials so that way you can go to geometry and go to algebra 2, and then one day you can go to college. So then after that you get a job so that by your mid-30s you can hardly afford a mortgage. And it's like, and so the kid has to choose between the uncertain prospect of maybe one day having an almost acceptable spot in the future economy, but right now suffering through really unpleasant stuff, or being with their friends and having immediate social payoff, right? And then foregoing this uncertain possible economic future that is increasingly less likely to them, right? And you can see why young people make those kinds of trade-offs the way that they do. And when we get this wrong, it starts what we call a disengagement cycle. So let's say we criticize a young person or demand something of them. Their interpretation might be, they don't like me, they don't care about me. Okay, it's a reasonable, it's not our preferred inference, but it's a reasonable inference. The kid makes that interpretation, they're going to be less proactive, they won't follow directions, they might be rude, right? They're not going to go out of their way to live the spirit of the law and do the unspoken things. If that's their interpretation, they're not going to be the kind of student who's going to show up at office hours and be like, oh, I read 3 times more than you assigned, and here I want to talk about it. Like those fun, exciting conversations in our discipline. But because students are not necessarily complying with what it means to be a great student in this setting, they're going to get more critical feedback because they don't have the skills, they don't have the expertise. And that will reinforce the worry that this person doesn't care about them, is looking down on them, is critiquing them, etc., because they don't like them. And we don't know how often this happens, once an hour, once a week, who knows, be different for different people. But we do have high confidence that if it happens a lot, then it spirals into serious outcomes, like poor performance, attrition, or even just waste on our part. Instruction that we give that fails to connect. So it's frustrating for both students and instructors, for parents and children, for bosses and employees. Okay, and we think that a key contributor to it is that we fail to honor and value the status and respect that young people are craving. And to give you an example of how to flip this, how to kind of start a different cycle, I want to tell you about a study we did in a medication adherence context, where we try to communicate differently and see what happened to behavior. And the context is, or the background for it is that, you may not know this, but 50% of all adolescents who receive organ transplants, like kidneys, livers, hearts, don't successfully take their anti-rejection meds as prescribed. So a kid might be on dialysis, right? Then finally get off the list, get a kidney, but as a part of it, they have to take 2 fistfuls of steroid pills, like 2 or 3 times a day, right? And then they might go on a camping trip with their friends and only bring enough for 5 doses, but then want to stay an extra night, right? And then they don't take it, and then the next day they're in rejection. Okay, so there's a lot of complicated reasons, but in general, you have this issue where about half in the 10 to 25 range fail to take their meds successfully. Same is true for outpatient cancer patients. So again, doctors are like, don't you know you have cancer and it's bad? Kids are like, yeah. They're like, don't you know you have to take chemo to get rid of the cancer? They're like, yeah. They're like, why aren't you doing it? I'm like, I don't know. Right? So doctors think they can grow and explain their way to adherence, and it doesn't work. So it's a huge issue. And I know my wife's an ICU, pediatric ICU nurse. So she worked in a nephrology clinic. She saw this every day. She was the one who had to call the moms. That's how I came up with this stuff. And so we decided to do a study of maybe the doctors need to communicate differently, or the medical professionals. And the problem is you can't do a study with cancer patients because your control group would die of cancer if you did it wrong. And so I would not be here if that's the kind of study that I did. So we needed a fake medicine that felt as unpleasant as taking 2 fistfuls of steroid pills, but it needed to be ultimately harmless. And so we chose the food supplement Vegemite. Have you guys ever had Vegemite before? So if any philosophers in the room, there's something called the Vegemite principle, which is like basically a phenomenon that is so unique and unpleasant that it's impossible to describe with words. But like imagine that you brewed a barrel of delicious beer, and then you took all the delicious beer out, and all that was left was the yeast, and then you put that in a jar and sold it at a grocery store. So that's Vegemite. And here's video of undergraduate participants, or pictures from a secret camera of undergraduates eating a spoonful of Vegemite in our study. So you can just see the, just classic disgust, the furrowed brow, the scrunched up nose, One of my favorite YouTube videos is Americans Eating Australian Food, it's called, and the Vegemite section is by far the funniest. Anyway, so we have them try it, and then we say, all right, thanks. Now we'd like you to take a spoonful 3 times larger. Okay, and there's a whole cover story about why it's part of the medical study, etc. And then we randomly assign them to be asked either respectfully or disrespectfully. Okay, so they're seeing a video. There's someone else in the room with a clipboard watching this, and the video says, "Hello, my name is so-and-so. I'm a second-year medical student finishing basic sciences. I'm here to, in the respectful condition, ask whether you might consider taking this medicine. Disrespectful condition, tell you that you should make this medicine." Respectful, you are a UT, that's a compliment at UT, by the way. It may not be here, I don't know. But for my undergrads it was. You're a UT student, so I figured I would explain the scientific reason why it would be helpful for you to take it. Disrespectful, based on what I know about medicine and disease, the smart thing to do is to take this medicine. Respectful, then everyone hears, some people have reported that this medicine is unpleasant to take because of the bitter taste, which of course is an understatement of the century. Respectful, you might find it helpful to think of that slight discomfort as doing your part to help others. Disrespectful, try to ignore that. Respectful, thank you for considering this request. Disrespectful, thank you in advance for your cooperation. Okay. And what we find, as you can imagine, is higher rates of taking the Vegemite when asked respectfully versus not. Even though the information about the medical benefits and the importance of the study and how it can help you, that was all identical. So it wasn't the long-term pragmatic differences or pragmatic payoff that mattered in this case. It was the way people were asked. Basically, did it honor and value the adolescent value of respect or not? And these are just the main effects. We also measured and manipulated testosterone in this study. So everyone took a nasal inhaler. Everyone was told it was testosterone. Some it was a placebo, and others was a nasal inhaler of testosterone. So we basically turned 18 to 22-year-olds into raging hormone, 13-year-olds. And there you see a dramatic difference between respectful and disrespectful among those who'd first taken the testosterone nasally. And so what we think is happening is that when there's respectful communication, then you're creating the inference that they're invested in me, I trust them, I can do better. And that inference causes young people to want to proactively fix mistakes, form better habits, maybe be more committed. Okay? But because of that, they move more quickly from novice to expert, and so they receive less critical feedback, in part because they're doing better. And that in turn reinforces the idea that the people who are teaching, mentoring, etc., believe in them and care about them. So it starts a kind of virtuous cycle that we think can end in greater retention, greater performance, and greater efficiency. So this kind of idea led us to ask the question of how we go from one-time statements to a whole culture of respect. So what does it look like to have a course where from day one to the last day, there's a kind of positive, respect-forward attitude happening? And that's tricky because I'm an experimental psychologist. I knew how to do these lab studies, but a lot happens day to day, moment to moment. It's verbal, nonverbal. Like our courses are complex, right? Our relationships are complex. And so I kind of paused my academic research for a while, and I started following great educators. So one was convenient. So there's a guy named Uri Treisman who leads a famous math education center called the Dana Center at UT. In the early 90s, he won the MacArthur Genius Award as a calculus professor. And he developed these workshops for students to improve retention and performance rates in calculus. Especially had a big impact on equity. So by the early 90s, 40% of all black Americans with PhDs in math were graduates of his courses. So single-handedly one of the greatest creators of equity, but also high standards in America. And he still teaches freshman calculus to this day. And so for 2 semesters, right after I got tenured, I sat in the back of his class and retook freshman calculus. I was like, what is this guy doing? I interviewed his students, I interviewed his wife, a lot of other people like that. We did, at some point, did a statistical analysis of a network called OnRamps. So this is a dual enrollment courses across the state of Texas. There's about 1,500 instructors in this network. So it's high school teachers who deliver college-level courses. It's like the same exams that we have for example, freshman physics at UT Austin. Same course, but high school teachers are delivering it. And what's nice about that is you've got a pre and a post test. So you can calculate a gain score for every single faculty member, but since they're not grading it, it's a kind of third-party objective measure of whether they're creating college-level learning. And so we looked at students' socioeconomic status and school resources, et cetera, and predicted gain scores, and we identified the instructors who were most above the regression line. So who are the people who basically legitimately created equity the most, or another way to say it is like lifted everyone to a high standard, no matter who you were, what your background was. And we invited them to Austin, and we found 20 of these people. One of them, someone I really thought was amazing. His name is Sergio Estrada. Followed him for a long time. And so we have a lot of these kinds of people. Sergio Estrada is the top outlying high school physics teacher in Texas. For 3 years, I called him on Fridays. I interviewed his wife, his best friend, etc. Fernita Ware came up with this concept of warm demander, you may have heard of. So I interviewed her and looked at her work. Kayvon Stassen, if you ever heard of a bridge program for PhDs, he invented this concept. So he was trying to solve diversity problems in physics. And the idea was everyone was just using the GRE math as a cut point. And so anyone below it was not even given an interview. But the problem is that GRE math tracks almost perfectly with your high school math teacher, which tracks almost perfectly with socioeconomic status in the US. Like correlations like 0.8, 0.9 at a district level. And so he was like, the measure of whether you're ready for PhD level in physics work is if you're publishing physics papers. And the way to find out if you can publish physics papers is to work in a lab and publish physics papers. So he created a master's program at a local HBCU next door to Vanderbilt and admitted promising students there, and they worked in a lab 2 years and they published. And if you finished and did a good job there, you're automatically admitted to Vanderbilt. By 4 or 5 years ago, he had graduated, I think, 120 first-gen students of color, women, Native American students. The first ever black first author on a Nature paper in the history of the journal Nature was his student. First ever tenured black physicist at I think, Yale was his student. Half of the diversity in astrophysics at NASA are graduates of his program. So he's an amazing mentor. He's now one of 6 people who oversees the NSF, which is not fun for him at this current stage. He won the MacArthur Genius Award last fall. Anyway, I followed him, studied his work. Bottom right is Chip England. If there's anyone, basketball fans from Central and South Texas, For 17 years, he was the shooting coach for the San Antonio Spurs. So the Spurs could draft players that were good at everything but shooting, and then Chip would fix their shots. So Kawhi Leonard, Tony Parker, these are current or future Hall of Famers. They couldn't shoot when they were drafted. Chip fixed their shot. 3 years ago, he was brought over by the Oklahoma City Thunder. They were the worst team in the NBA, had the lowest free throw percentage. They just set all kinds of records. In the last year, won the NBA championship. Free throw percentage went up 15 percentage points. So I interviewed Chip, followed him around, talked to him. I had him teach my kids how to do things, watched him coach them, and just tried to figure out what he did. And on and on. I cold emailed Microsoft CEO and found their best manager. I found this center called Encircle. It's across the street from the Mormon Tabernacle in Salt Lake City, Utah. It is a center for LGBTQ plus youth. And suicide is the leading cause of death for youth in Utah, and it's 3x for queer youth. And in 6 years of being open, Encircle has had 0 youth suicides. So they're doing something, but what's happening? Right? I talked to the people who work there, the parents, the kids, etc. What all these people have in common is they're doing more than what in my past work I would call growth mindset. They're doing what I call a mentor mindset. And it's very simply this combination of very high standards and very high support. So it's like being the walking, talking embodiment of that respectful, wise feedback note, right? They're also like living the respectful column in that Vegemite study. So the mentor mindset is you're tough, you're demanding, it's hard, but you're relentless in your support so that everyone can meet that hard standard. And there are two opposites that I mainly focus on. One is high standards, low support, what I call the enforcer mindset. Okay? So this is someone who is basically saying, look, my discipline is super rigorous. I'm not going to let just anybody walk through and pass this class or say that they know my discipline. It's going to be really demanding. You can do it or not. It's up to you. If you don't, pay attention. If you don't get the answers right, if you're not smart enough to be in this class, then you won't do well. And I'm not going to go out of my way to fix that for you. It's kind of, it's on you, right? So you mainly think of yourself, an enforcer, as I'm here to enforce strict policies that people can choose to meet or not, and if they don't, there are harsh consequences. Okay. In sports, it's kind of the Bobby Knight, like throwing chairs at players kind of mentality. The 1990s football coach, Texas football coach mentality. But look, I get where it comes from. Like when I talk to high school teachers who think of themselves as enforcers, they think basically society is going to hell in a handbasket. That there's no standards or rigor or discipline anymore. Everybody's giving up, and I'm the last bastion of sanity in an insane world. That's how a lot of enforcers describe it to me, and I get it, right? But the problem is, if you've got super high standards, and this is how much support you need, but most people have this, who are the people who meet the high standards? It's the people who can compensate for the resources from elsewhere. So if this is what the resources that students have to do well in your class, and these are the standards, the only people who make up the gap are people who can pay for someone else to help them do it, or who came from a high school where they already learned it, right? I did this interview with a lot of freshmen. I do a lot of our first year stuff, to increase retention and everything. So I'm constantly doing focus groups with freshmen, and also later people talking about freshman year. Anyway, one of my honor students, a young black woman from outside of Dallas, was in Plan 2, which is the honors college at UT, and she was in an English class, and they were doing Milton. And she'd never read Milton before. It wasn't on the curriculum in her high school. But the student next to her had gone to an elite prep school in Houston. And that student had read the Bible cover to cover junior year and Milton cover to cover senior year. So with 20 students in a seminar, that student and the teacher were talking back and forth like a PhD level seminar. And the teacher's eating it up. I'm sure was going home to his spouse to be like, oh, it's the best day ever. I have this great student. They're going to get a PhD in English one day. But the student was just regurgitating things they'd heard their high school teacher say, right? And no one else had read it. And so my student Jada was like, I didn't talk the rest of that semester. Like, why would I talk to the professor? They don't care about me or like me because I'm not already an expert in what they're teaching. And the teacher's only building on stuff that the student already knew. Okay? Now the teacher, I'm sure, is like, well, Jada didn't care. She didn't talk in class. Bad letter of recommendation, right? So that's the kind of enforcer mentality. They're like, well, there's a rigorous standard. Some people meet it, other people don't, and that's their choice, without being appreciative of the dynamics that are required to meet the standard. The protector is low standards, high support. So this is like, students have been through so much, they're over anxious, they're really stressed out, they're feeble, they're fragile. I don't want to be the straw that breaks the camel's back, so I'm going to just make it as easy as possible, make it, unstressful, etc. And again, I get where this is coming from. There's certainly a societal narrative right now. There are serious concerns about youth mental health that are legitimate in every public health survey. The causes of those are unclear, but I get why people are concerned about this. And a lot of people who go into the educating professions think of it as a helping profession, and no one likes to think of themselves as causing suffering to the people that are their primary vocation to help. So I understand where protector comes from too, but of course, from the student's perspective, protector is terrifying. And I've interviewed hundreds of students now, and they're like, when my teacher lowers standards for me and basically is mainly concerned about protecting my ego or my stress levels, then it makes me feel unprepared for the future. And they're terrified that they will not be able to do anything on their own in the future. So protector and enforcer are legitimate. I understand where they come from. They're not crazy. Apathetic is low standards, low support. That's garbage. Don't do that. But we can strive to do more mentor. So if you see yourself in the enforcer, you're like, I get it. Fine. Keep your standards. Add the support. If you see yourself in protector, fine. Keep the support. Add the standards. Also want to say, I don't really care what the names are. You're welcome to use these names, but they've gone by other names in the literature. Mentor's gone by warm demander or authoritative or radical candor. Or, I'm not trying to colonize the language here. The main thing that I think about is that the literature has talked about these as styles, leadership styles, and I think about them as mindsets, but not just because mindset's my thing. I think of it this way because I really do think that what you believe about young people, your mindset about young people, shapes which box you end up in. And so if you think of them as styles, like I'm an authoritarian style teacher, what am I supposed to do with that information? Like revisit my childhood? Maybe I had unattached parents or something. Like, is it childhood trauma that caused me to be an authoritarian? Or I had a bad advisor? Like, fine, but that's not useful for me right now. But if it's a mindset, it's like, oh, I can be in a different mindset right now. And I can do that when I pay attention to what I believe about young people. So to illustrate that, as I started developing this framework, I'd share with people and be like, well, if mentor mindset is what the research says works, why doesn't everybody do it? If that's a reasonable question. And I think it's because we're stuck in a dichotomy, thinking that there are only two extremes. You're either the enforcer, like high standards, tough guy. Downside, I'm an authoritarian sadist, right? But that's the price of doing business if I'm going to maintain rigor. Or I'm the protector. I'm caring and loving, great. Downside, I'm a wimp and a pushover, but that's the price of caring, right? It feels like we can only either be Arnold Schwarzenegger in The Terminator or Arnold Schwarzenegger in Twins. And I do realize that there's a shelf life in how long this slide will work. But I think we have the wrong underlying beliefs about young people, and that's why I started with this exercise. That, if we end up in that first blank for things that are like, young people are incorrigible, short-sighted, selfish, dangerous to themselves and society, enforcer things make a lot of sense on the second line. If it's a young people are like overly stressed out, over anxious, like broken, damaged, traumatized, then protector stuff makes a lot of sense on the second one, right? So I think the first step is to kind of interrogate what we believe. And then I think that the next step is to think about, well, what are the practices that could help us, say we start believing more of a mentor mindset, what do we do about it? And here's a table we use a lot with educators, where just contrasting mentor and enforcer, because these end up being two of the most common. In a mentor, your overall approach in the classroom is what we call collaborative troubleshooting. So it's like, all right, let's look at what went wrong, see what we need to fix, and then try something different. In an enforcer, it's what might be called go try harder alone. Right? It's like, I already explained it, it's very clear, it's in the syllabus, it's on Canvas, you need to go do it, and then I'll talk to you. Right? And in a mentor mindset, the source of the confusion is the student's process. Like if you presume that they worked in earnest and with good faith to try to understand it, then if they're still confused, then something went awry. There's some mix-up. And so it's our collaborative job to figure out what that was. In an enforcer mindset, it's character. The student doesn't care, they're not paying attention, or they're in the wrong class. Right? In a mentor mindset, your view of mistakes is that they're useful. So a mistake is a launching off point for how we need to adapt and explain something differently. I'll go into mentor mindset classrooms, like Uri Treisman's class. He'll give points out for best wrong answer. Like if you have a wrong answer that he's never thought of before, he'll be like, I have no idea how you could have gotten that answer. Like, can you explain that to me? And they'll explain it, and he'll be like, oh, I must have said something 3 days ago that made you have this starting premise. And from that premise, everything you said is right. But I said something that gave you the wrong starting premise. So the fact that you told me that means I now know what I need to change for next year, and I need to clarify this next class period. So your mistake made the whole class smarter. So thank you so much for having the courage to tell it to me, so that way I can adapt and make the class smarter. And so it becomes a badge of honor for having had the guts to explain what they didn't understand. That's not the enforcer mindset. It's like, how could you not know this? Explained it super clearly. This is basic background knowledge. You either don't care or this is the wrong major, right? Mentor mindset, questions are useful opportunities to deepen our understanding. So when a student asks a question, then it makes the teacher think. In an enforcer mindset, questions slow the class down and pull everyone off track. So I see this a lot in enforcer classrooms. Like, I had a great lesson planned. There's all this content I was going to get through. I had to stop and answer this question that only you had. And now we're not getting to the rest of the content, and that's harming the whole class, because now everyone's behind, because you asked that question. Right? And so I understand where this comes from, but from the student's perspective, right? Like if we presume that they are in earnest trying to be learners, right? Then kind of moralizing and adding like a layer of character and commitment to any misconception or confusion will feel disrespectful and like an unfair accusation to students. And we know that young people are really sensitive to being falsely accused of things. And that's what it feels like when we imply that a mistake is coming from a lack of character. It feels like a false accusation. And nothing pisses them off more than that, besides like hypocrisy. And so we encourage instructors to think about a kind of pyramid, a kind of culture of learning pyramid, where you've got your own beliefs and values. Do you believe students are capable of learning and growing? And then do your policies and procedures match that? So we've done bunches of interviews with students about growth mindset and related concepts, and we asked them about their instructors. We're like, who's an instructor who you don't respect? And an instructor they don't respect is someone who says on the first day, I believe in all of you, you can grow and learn. And then you look at their exams and their assignments, and all of their assignments are one and done things, right? Where there's impossible to learn from a mistake, right? They see a disconnect and a hypocrisy between if the professor's like, it's okay to make a mistake in my class. And by the way, first unit exam, second unit exam, third unit exams, those contain those 6 weeks beforehand. We're never going to ask that content again. If you don't learn it by that point, you'll never get points back for it. They're like, why should I look at my mistakes? Like, there's no point. And so almost every great mentor mindset teacher that I've seen has ways for students to either recover points or replace previous assignments by learning stuff later. And the idea is that some students have this learning slope, other students have this learning slope, other students have that learning slope, and you need a grading system that accommodates multiple learning slopes. And then of course people worry, oh well, if you can retake an exam or whatever, then won't students not care about the first one? I hear that a lot. Like if you can redo it. But the kind of student who waits till the last second and then gets an F on the first test is not the kind of student that's going to then learn everything in the next week and a half to retake it, right? So the student who would have failed the first test under the old policy is still going to fail the second test under the new policy if you don't reach them. But then what you get instead is another 20-30% of students who do poorly on the first test and then have a no shit moment, and then they learn it, and then they recover, and then by the end of the class, they're some of your best students. Paul Tough in his book, The Inequality Machine, follows one of these students. He sat next to me in Uri's class, Uri Treisman's class, and there was a young woman from South Texas who was in freshman calculus, and it was all C's and D's for the first 3 midterms, but Uri has a policy where the final midterm, which is legitimately super hard, it's the same midterm as the freshman calculus class at Harvard, it can make up for all the midterms, but it's legitimately hard. And this young woman got a 95 on it, went on to become a math major, and then got a scholarship to Harvard for data science and is now making like $300,000 a year. And her parents made $40,000 a year, didn't go to college. Right? So like when you allow for alternative learning slopes, it's still super rigorous, but it's a type of support for students. In my class, we do final projects, harsh grading. Most students get a 70 on the first round. It's 2 weeks before the term's over. Final one is due during finals week, but it can make up for the first one. And so I see the most growth in my class in the last 3 weeks of the year. Now some people are like, I don't want to grade that much, like I get it, but like I don't want 40% of my students to like be one and done and get a D. Even if you have good policies, you have to communicate them, we've learned. The students will interpret tough, demanding, rigorous courses as enforcer courses unless you're clear that they're mentor courses. And unfortunately, they will interpret care, concern, flexibility as protector courses unless you're clear about the standards in those courses. So we've learned that it's not just what you do, you can't just kind of live by example, unfortunately. You have to be 2 to 3 times more transparent than you think you need to be about a lot of these things. And so we coach people to revisit their retesting and revision policies, have routines for reframing mistakes that we have people plan out, and then we have people write a first day of class speech where they address key questions. What does your grade mean to me? Can you improve in my class? Are there any examples of former students who did poorly in the first few weeks and then later did well? If so, here are their stories, right? If you have a question, what does that mean to me? Am I mad at you or am I excited about it? If you make a mistake, etc. So we've learned you can just plan out 5 things or so in advance, and they're questions that are on students' minds that most professors aren't addressing, and it helps them start interpreting what we're doing in a mentor mindset way. And that's how you build a kind of mentor mindset culture. In the book, there's a gray section towards the back, and we have exercises for each of these, including a kind of framework for a culture of learning speech. All right, I'm going to end there by just saying, in the book, we've got very specific practices, things you can implement, but I don't want to imply that you need to get everything right away. There's something that I emphasize a lot, and it's the power of the do-over. Anyone who's involved with young people has heard this narrative that you say something wrong and you screw up their life, right? That's what they tell moms the second you get a baby, right? They're like, you're gonna ruin your kid, and you're gonna give them the wrong organic bottle, and then when they're 40, they're gonna pay thousands of dollars in therapy because you ruined them. It's like we're terrified of screwing stuff up, especially in a semester. It's really quick, it happens, we don't have that many interactions. What we've learned is that mentor mindset stuff is not impossible because you can always do it over. You can snap at somebody. I've learned, I coach baseball 6 nights a week and, 4 kids and coaching 150 undergrads. I have a lot of interactions that don't go well. You can screw up, and then you can go to someone and say, you know, these are the values we're trying to live. I didn't live them in that interaction. I still need you to do this thing, but I should have been more curious why it was hard for you. So could you tell me from your perspective what the issue was? Now let's solve it together. You can do that, and they'll remember the do-over more than the first thing. And they'll also learn, by the way, that everyone is growing and learning and can make mistakes. So I'm not saying you have to walk out of here and get all of your language perfectly right. I call it a mindset because it's an approach, it's a belief that then you can work on over time with your students. So I'm going to end there. I think we have a break and then some Q&A, but thank you so much for your attention. I'm excited to be with you today. Thank you.
Okay, we can do some Q&A. Abby, are you here with a microphone? If you guys have any questions for David, this would be a perfect time.
If anybody has a question, I have the mic right here. I can run it.
We can also take a 5-minute break if you'd like, but just in the meantime, so we keep him in the same spot.
Yeah. I'm coming to you. Keep your hand up.
Yeah, we have a question right here.
I'm coming.
My question is about policies about regrading and rescoring. How do you help ensure, I guess maybe this isn't my realm, but that it's actually motivation to learn and not just points motivation? Because I see a lot of students who are like, I need to get this many points, and they're more focused on the points and the grade and the external than the internal learning and motivation. That is always something I'm trying to cultivate.
Yeah, I mean, I think I've become a believer in mixed motivations, that it's okay to be motivated by multiple things. I think a lot of psychologists want people to be only intrinsically motivated for the love and joy of learning, but I think the reality is that while you're learning something really hard, it almost always feels bad. It's after you've learned it that it feels amazing. So having learned feels great. In the middle of learning, you're failing, you don't trust your instincts, your conceptual models are all screwed up, like it doesn't feel good. And so I tend to think of grades and points as a way of helping people justify to themselves why they're doing something that feels pretty bad right now. But then once they have learned, then they need to see how awesome that was and how cool it is and how much you can now do. What new puzzles can we solve in this discipline? Like what new problems can we think differently about now that I have this conceptual toolkit? And so there's a rhythm to hard, especially lower level skill learning in a discipline, and then application where there's the payoff of having done that learning, And so I, for example, in my class, I think of quizzes as point rewards for having done the reading. So I don't have tests. I have super hard, building on cognitive science, retrieval-based quizzes that are 5 questions. But I have a policy where you can drop your lowest one. Like it's not, I'm not trying to make that be their main grade. It's the way I frame it is, you did the reading and you should get points for that. And that's fine for me. For their projects though, the projects are always a passion project. So like I have a speed dating thing I do with 150 students, and when I do it in person, it's like there's sticky notes, and you're like, you guys are doing income inequality, and you guys are doing like sex and gender, and you guys are doing like tax credits, or like they're doing different policy problems, and they form groups and they come up with projects to use behavioral science to solve them, and they have to switch through 3 times, and so they have to pick something that they care about, and they're doing it with those other people, and then there's a sense of camaraderie and commitment to those people, and it would just be socially weird for them to half-ass that. Now, should they get a lot of points if they do it great? Yes, that's fine with me. But like I tell them, I do not care if you all get 100 in this class, because that means I've gotten you to 100% mastery of the class. But it's very hard to get 100 in the class. Here's the rubric, here's the evaluation, and they practice grading assignments starting on the second day of class. You're like, this was a 70, and students thought it was a 95. So they're learning the high standard early on. So by the end, the grade is like a side effect of having done a project they were proud of. but I'm always bringing in former students who are talking about their class projects and how they talked about it in their interview at McKinsey. And or I got into UT Southwestern Medical School because I talked about my class project. So I'm building that mythology around it. The way Uri does it in his class is he has students go to the National Academy of Sciences website and download the latest reports and then write a one-page essay about how anything from calculus this semester is being used by scientists at the frontiers. And then they have to describe what they might like to contribute to the frontiers of knowledge. So there's still a whole points thing, but like the culture is he treats them like they're leaders in their fields. And you're going to be changing the frontiers of mathematics. And that's why I'm being so serious with you. And that's why it's important for you to not memorize and forget, but instead revisit your mistakes and make sure you master it. So he doesn't even frame it in terms of points, although he's happy to give high grades. But I will say in math, he would get critiqued by his colleagues for having grade inflation if he didn't give the same exams as peer courses. So he on purpose gives the Harvard freshman exam so that if his colleagues say, you give everyone a 90, he's like, they got a 90 on the Harvard test, and the Harvard test, those kids got an 80. And so I got my kids to better than Harvard, so screw you. It's like, no one complains about grade inflation because he's got an external standard. And when we arbitrarily make stuff up ourselves, it's harder to do that. So that's kind of how I think of it, is real world assessments to the extent possible, or at a minimum real world rubrics for grading, so that way students see that it's high status and prestigious to have met that standard, rather than grubbing for points. Yeah. 1 and 2. Yeah.
Thank you very much. This is very inspiring. So you said at the beginning of your exposition that we live in a culture that masks the love of learning, and I just wanted to briefly share an anecdote with you. So my son is about to turn 10 years old next week, and I overheard his conversation with his friend as they start 5th grade, and his friend was very not excited about going back to school. He said that he hated it. He didn't look forward to recess, to friends, not to anything. My son wasn't as, he didn't share that view entirely, but he did express to me that he was anxious about going back. So I think that that is a great example of this masking of the love of learning that you talked about. Though personally, that saddens me, because I think that it's not okay for children as young who are, inherently curious to feel that way about school. But on that note, I wanted to ask you if you have any sense, or if there is any talks in the literature about when did this start happening? Was it always the case? You made reference to Aristotle, so I'm thinking maybe this was something that was happening all along. And if not, I would like to hear your thoughts about that. And also I was wondering if is this a global phenomenon, or is this something that we see mostly in the States?
Yeah, so a couple things. So there's historical comparisons and then contemporary cross-national comparisons. For the latter, we've worked a lot with the PISA survey. So PISA is run by the OECD. It surveys and tests in 76 developing nations around the world. And we see very similar trends around the world. In general, engagement or intrinsic motivation or love of learning decreases with every single year of formal schooling, until about senior year, and then senior year of high school it goes up to be about equal to sophomore year. But it never recovers to where it was at kindergarten, basically. So another thing is, the more time that average people around the world spend in school, the less they like school. That's a global phenomenon. So then historically, where did that come from? And it's a little tricky because there's a sample selection bias. And the selection bias is we now have universal formal education. And even as recently as the 50s, people were not expected to go to high school, right? It was the post-World War II boom that changed the labor market, required for advanced technical skills, that overhauled the U.S. economy. Now everyone needs the high school diploma, and then you had free college for the GI Bill. And so there was a new goal of mass education. Before that, education was just for the privileged elite. And that was, no one complained. Maybe they did, but no one pretended like it was anything else but that, right? And so, in Aristotle's time, you had a tutor, a one-on-one, Plato, right? And they were just tutors. And maybe they taught 10 people, but it really was one-to-one. And so everyone throughout history has liked one-to-one. Like if you had the world's smartest person, personally, I mean, that's why the movie The Sword and the Stone is great. It's like, what if Merlin was your tutor? It'd be amazing, And so people like formal education wanted that. But mass education, where you've got to get a lot of people on board for the same amount of knowledge to promote like a labor market, is an invention, in the last 80 years, and we haven't done it well. And it was done so quickly in response to market forces that no one thought about really what young people need. And the model was really, it's an enforcer model, that young people are left to their own devices. Young people will goof off. They'll go play outside and be silly and not be serious. And real work, that paying work, requires self-control and discipline. And therefore school needs to teach kids to have self-control and discipline to do things they don't want to do so they could later exchange their labor for pay. Right? That's the basic logic of the market economy and capitalism. And so school is designed on purpose to teach kids to suppress what they naturally would want to do, because an employer doesn't pay you to go do what you naturally want to do. They don't pay you to, work on the loom or whatever. So I think it's not an accident in the system that we had, but it's not designed at all to be good for young people. So it's not surprising the longer they spend in it, the less they like it. One and then another one.
We are going to actually take a small little break. Let's give David a huge round of applause. That was an amazing.
And how do we encourage students to distinguish the moral and ethical consequences of authorship and copyright in their use of AI? How do we create student stakeholders? So they're asking of all panelists, so Dawn, if you would like to take a crack at it, would be wonderful, or Kate.
I'm going to Kate lead this one.
So how do we encourage students to distinguish the moral and ethical consequences of authorship, copyright, and their use of AI? And how do we create student stakeholders?
I think in some ways this is an expanded problem that we face with plagiarism, and I'm old enough that I remember when plagiarism meant that somebody actually had to take a physical book out of the library and hold it down and type in, and of course none of our students do that now. And then they moved to being able to cut and paste from a website, and if the website wasn't clearly labeled, they didn't necessarily understand that those were someone else's words, right? And this is just an exaggeration of that. I think having that conversation about creativity and who owns words, and then also being honest about what it means when, why do I have them cite my lecture in a paper if that's where the background information came from? One reason is to show that if the mistake is there, the mistake was mine. I said the wrong thing in lecture. It's the CYA thing. But the other thing is that's somebody's idea, and they deserve credit for that. And highlighting in their own papers what is their thought, and that they can own that, right? They own their thesis statement. They don't have to footnote their thesis statement because they own it, and that's their creative thought. And if somebody else took that, that would be complicated. And all of those things, so moral and ethical, I think I'm on that end of the sort of spectrum. The other side of the question, of course, is being lazy, right? And pretending you've done work that you haven't, and that being, and I think we have other metrics for expecting people to then, be caught out for that.
So beyond or just the moral and ethical part of this, what I've wondered about, focus on is, why do students cheat in the first place? And I think quite often it's a confidence and self-efficacy issue, that a student fundamentally doesn't believe that they're capable of producing good work, and therefore they think about, well, how do I get to that then? I had an example last year. For the first time, I had a student on an exam use AI to try to answer an essay exam. It did not go well because it looked like something that an uninformed person had produced. But when I was talking to the student about it, in this case, she had not really gotten up to speed in class, had not really participated, etc. And the AI was kind of a desperate attempt to say, well, I've got to put something out. And so if we can figure out ways to enhance confidence and self-efficacy by having progressive building experiences as we're writing papers, I think that can help.
Would you like a new question, Mark?
Can I one quick thing on that?
Absolutely.
It's just I think they gave great answers to it. The other thing to add to it though is that this is not just a student question. This is a society-wide issue with AI, and there's lots of cases going through the courts right now about AIs plagiarizing and how they did all their training and stuff. And so I think there's sort of the side question of even if you're accurately citing, I use this AI for this and that, well, you're not really citing the people that idea or those images or whatever came from. And so, I mean, I think it's a question we're all going to struggle with, but it's a question our society hasn't even figured out an answer to as a whole, legally, ethically, or anything else.
I'll keep the mic with you because this question I think would be helpful being that you're film and media arts. Question from table 11, after learning how students are using AI currently, how can we help them employ AI to inspire their creativity and intelligence instead of hinder or replace their own work?
I might have a different answer than a lot of other departments because of the type of area I work in. I think it can actually be, it opens up a lot of creative possibilities that didn't exist before. Something we were just talking about with our summer film production program is there used to be scripts that we told students, you're just not going to be able to make this because this would be too expensive. And there's things now that they could do because of these AI tools for no money or very low money that just couldn't be done before. So now they can actually explore creative avenues that weren't open to them before. I feel like I probably got way off of what the actual substance of the original question is, but I think there's a lot of possibilities for it. I think there's great ways. I've seen it used and used it myself for some things in terms of just brainstorming, or I have this sort of one core idea for something that's not quite right. Like, can you spin me 10 different variations on this? And maybe I don't like any of those, but one of them will point me in some different ways. I think it can be helpful when someone's stuck, or as writer's block or whatever as well. But as a filmmaker, the visual, the creative possibilities it's opening up for low budget filmmaking are very cool, although it's coming with its own challenges for that as well.
Anybody else?
Yeah, our approach to adolescent or young people's kind of behavior challenges, so when we design an intervention or approach, we try to first define what is the default way a young person perceives the situation and where the status criteria are. And so, like, one default way of thinking about AI in education is that it's easy and awesome to use AI, and only like older fuddy-duddies say don't use it. And so if I agree with what my professors are saying rather than what it seems like other people my age are doing, then I'm like misaligned in terms of my identity and what I perceive as socially valuable. And like an example, like when we did our work on reducing teenagers' junk food snacking, so the default way adults talk to kids about healthy eating, which is a little similar to how people think about AI. They're like, learn critical thinking now so that later you have this valuable skill. That's a little bit like saying, eat your broccoli now so you don't have diabetes in your 50s. Okay, and that's the conventional approach to a lot of health education, and it's pretty disappointing if you look at randomized trials. What we did instead is to frame healthy eating as a way to exert independence and autonomy from food companies that spend a lot of money getting children addicted to junk food. So we tell them about the scientists that invented hot Cheetos to get people, basically it melts on your tongue before it gets to your natural satiety mechanism, so that way you don't know you've eaten food. So then and it deposits spiciness, so you keep salivating. So it does all these things to make you keep eating hot Cheetos. And we tell teenagers that, and then they're like, screw those guys in the suits. I'm going to eat fruit and drink water instead. And we did that study. We secretly tracked what kids bought in the lunchroom using their IDs in middle school lunchrooms, and teaching about health long-term health consequences had no benefits, but sticking it to the man changed healthy eating behaviors. So that's the kind of thing that we do. So if you now think about AI, like the argument that has as its core, you need to use self-discipline and self-control because I, the grown-up, say so, that's always going to be a challenge to win. You're just going to have a subset of people who say fine, people pleasers, and a subset that's like, no way, I'm doing it my way. So what's the way to reframe so that way AI is viewed as the lazy way, or the easy way, or the low status way? And I don't know exactly what it is, but there are a lot of companies that do really want you to replace everything with AI because they charge you every time you use it. And they're making it free now for students, right? But as soon as you're in industry, then they're going to charge a lot more. So there's a whole financial plan to get students to not think for themselves. So that way, when you're in a real job, you think you have to subscribe to lots of AI tools that you can pay per query. And as soon as everyone's doing that, they're going to triple or quadruple the cost of queries on AI. Right? It's like Uber used to be super cheap, now it's like 4x what it was, right? Because they got rid of all the cabs. And now everyone has to use Uber and Lyft, right? 100% going to happen with AI. So you're preparing yourself to not be controlled by corporate interests, is one framing. Now I don't know if that's the exact one, but like that kind of thing could work. But it's very different from, I'm the expert in my discipline, the way I learned it 50 years ago is this, and you need to do it because I said so. Like, that's not going to work.
The next question is from table 3. How do we create specialized one-on-one and small-scale connections in large-scale anonymous environments?
I do that a lot. So I teach 150 undergrads every semester in an online course. And it is project-based and group-based. So you're in a group of 4 at all times. And it's partially a software solution, but it doesn't have to be. But I use a software called Engagely. So it's a Stanford startup that got big during COVID. And the idea is that, like on Zoom, there's one Zoom, and then you're sent to breakout rooms. In Engagely, you're at a digital table with 3 to 5 other people at all times. So you're video on, audio on with that small group of people, but you're also watching the main lecture. And then you can raise your hand and join the podium at any time. So it'd be like being in this room, you're at your group talking, and you can come to the podium and then leave the podium whenever you want. So that's a technology thing that I use, but it wouldn't work if it was just that. So on the second day of class, we do an activity called the Fast Friends Paradigm. So there's a famous social psychologist named Art Aaron who developed this protocol, and it's a set of questions that increase in their intimacy as you go down, and it's like 30 questions. And so I do 3 rounds of like 7 minutes. And it starts with like, what's your favorite color and why, and it ends basically like, do you believe in God, why or why not, right? And it's amazing, students get to the last question, and they have these deep, intimate conversations, and they feel fully known by somebody else, and you can do that in 20 minutes. It's also known as like the 30 questions to fall in love or whatever. So the New York Times popularized it, but it's an experimental paradigm from social psychology where you bring people in the lab and have them be friends, and then you study friendship. That's what it was designed. Anyway, we do that, and then I create groups of 4 that are 2 pairs of people who've gone through the Fast Friends together. So now you feel known by one other person, and the other people feel known by each other, and then you create groups there. And then the last thing we do is we have a norm setting where there's a destructive and constructive group behaviors. Do you guys use this? Anyone use this? So it's a list of like 5 bad behaviors, like dominating conversation, being impatient, delegating work to everybody else, or that kind of thing. And then there's 5 good behaviors, like building on others' ideas, getting curious about what they're doing, coming prepared, whatever it is. And you pick the bad one that you're most inclined to do, and the good one you're almost certain you're going to do. And then your conversation is, how are we going to, how can you bring the good one out of me, and how can you help me do less of the bad one? And so that becomes like almost a group contract that we do at the beginning of class, and then we have an actual contract, which is, if someone's not there in class, how do you want to be contacted? And so everyone says, platform and the account number or whatever it is, that you're okay being contacted when class starts. So if you're not in class in the first 3 minutes, your group is reaching out to you saying, here's what we're doing today, we miss you, we're getting started, we want your contributions. And so then that's how with an online class, we have 98% in-person attendance for the whole class in small groups and people working together.
Question from table 9. How do we implement efforts to engage students in doing the reading, learning the theory, engaging AI strategically, and following a mentoring model while protecting faculty's time? Feels incompatible to do all of them. That's what we'll say here, not unfortunately.
Can I give a stab at this one?
Absolutely.
I was also thinking about this with the last question too, but it applies equally here. I think the most important thing is to not try to do everything in every class. Big classes can sometimes be what the students want, and big classes with lower engagement have a place alongside, at a school like this, more intimate classes where you can focus on a different skill. I think a class where you're really emphasizing reading skills, I had a lot of luck with classes where the goal was actually reading skills. That was the goal, right? The goal was not content delivery, honestly. I mean, we had content, I was teaching about what I know, but the goal was their reading skills. Or another semester, it's a different kind of goal, or it's, you know, I'm gonna work with you one-on-one on your writing. I can't work with you one-on-one on your writing and work with you one-on-one on your reading all semester. Those are not actually totally compatible goals, even though they are related, right? So I would just make a plug for not doing everything in every class, but being very thoughtful about what specific goal you have for this semester in this class, with this number of students, this technology circumstance, yada, yada, yada.
So about 20 years ago, I wrestled with this issue about how do you get students prepared for class, and made a decision to go with a quiz at the start of the class session. I don't go with random quizzes, because I think that's kind of, students feel like they're playing Russian roulette when you do that. And so these are ones that are very specifically announced, and it's made very clear that this is over this particular content that you'll read. Canvas has made this wonderful now, because you put like half a dozen questions, first 8 minutes of class, students open up their laptop, do the questions. And one of the things I was just talking with Kate about this earlier was I don't use questions from publishers. I think those things are evil, they're dumb, and so I write these questions myself. Although I've been using ChatGPT lately to help me with them, that's been kind of interesting. And I find that students are really pretty well prepared for class and have completed the reading when they know that there's going to be a quiz that's assessed big picture ideas about what they've read.
Question from table 1. How do we encourage students to use AI productively, not just going there to get the answer, and how do we model that ourselves?
I thought, I just feel like I've been talking too much. But there's an idea I borrowed from a colleague of mine who has students do the final project using only AI on the second day of class, and then they spend that class period critiquing how the AI did it and comparing it to the rubric. And he's made sure that the assignment is something you couldn't fully delegate to the AI. And so then students see exactly that they would get a 50 if they did the final project using AI. And he's like, look, what you're gonna learn is the other 50% that AI is not doing. And that's the focus of the class. So when we're doing some of the class, just know it's for that. And then he kind of lets them do the 50% that it could have done with no knowledge. And so that basically encourages critical thinking about what it's good at, what it's not good at. And there's a ton of things that's terrible at it. Like for like a year, I led a team that was the internal tester for Google's large language model. This is the year before ChatGPT was released. And we were testing how good it was at giving emotional advice for people in distress. And that's important because people don't just Google like, where's the directions to Walmart? They're like, am I a good person, right? And then the model needs to say something that's not gonna cause a lawsuit. And so I was leading that team and we were testing it. And the engineers had no idea how to do it. They would be like, it'd be like, yes, 1 for empathy. It says, I'm sorry you're crying. You know, and like that's the kind of thing. But like, it's not the kind of advice psychologists would give. And so it turns out that the models are great at being polite and they're terrible at giving you substantive advice to solve problems that are interpersonal. And the reason why is because it's trained on everything on Reddit. And regular people on Reddit are not good at giving advice, except in like certain cases. And so once you know how the models are trained and what data sources are being used for it, then you kind of know what it's good at and not good at. And once you know that, that's a competitive advantage because a lot of people are fully relying on the models for things they shouldn't be. And so then it becomes a skill in your class. Of the things I'm teaching you, what are the things where Reddit already knows it? And what are the things where this is unique, elite knowledge that you will now bring to the labor market later?
This idea of creating discrepancy awareness, I think, is critical. So there's actually an exercise that I'm going to be doing this Saturday in class with a group of executive MBAs. And I tested it with ChatGPT, and it did exactly what I thought it would do. The scenario I'm setting up is that I'm going to put up a prompt that I use of ChatGPT and ask it to provide me 10 pictures of CPAs, certified public accountants, at work. Now, ChatGPT did produce a set of pictures. First of all, it only gave me 9 rather than 10, so it disobeyed my instruction. But second of all, this 3x3 matrix that it gave me deviates dramatically from the actual data on CPAs. So right now, about 54% of CPAs in the United States are women. 14% are of Asian and Pacific Island heritage. What did ChatGPT give me? It gave me 9 pictures with 7 men and 2 women. Now, I went back to ChatGPT and I said, dear ChatGPT, is what you gave me reflective of the CPA audience? They came back and said, no, actually, it isn't. It's 54% women, it's 14% Pacific Islander. So it was able to find that. Then I asked it, why did you do that? And it said, well, those were the stock photos available. I'm serious. And then it went to the next step, and it said, but the reason I did it was because that's what people think that the CPA market looks like, rather than what's actually there. But I think in class, what's going to be helpful is to help students understand that unless you have that knowledge in the first place about what the CPA profile looks like, you would not be able to catch that type of error. And that's kind of, I think, our value added is help people understand you have to have the foundational knowledge to be able to assess the accuracy of the output.
Can I ask a question? This is a question for you, actually. I was very struck by your discussion of grown-splaining, because I have nearly adult children to whom I grown-splain all the time. And I was planning on Monday to explain to my students that training yourself on ChatGPT is training yourself to be replaced by a computer. And if you want your SMU education, $400,000 to equal being replaced by a computer in 5 years, go for it. That sounds a lot like grown-splaining. How can I reword that so that that is heard? I mean, that is the experience of watching the labor market evolve. How can it be heard by them in a way that is productive?
Yeah, I think that the core argument isn't wrong, but the framing of it feels like it can be improved. And maybe it's just a lost gain framing thing. So alternative is you were admitted here because we saw value in you. Like, you can think about things, you have concerns, you have skills and experiences that are important to our student body. And we saw that in the admissions, we saw that when we recruited you. We want you and your values and your ideas here, and that's later what employers are going to want. And what we want you to know how to do is to add value above and beyond what a machine can do. Like, you have certain commitments, you have a sense of purpose, or you're developing it, you see what's wrong with the world. And if you don't figure out how to use your skills to change those things in the world or to add value in whatever market you're entering, then that's a shame. And on top of that, you'll be so much more happier and more fulfilled if you're doing the kind of work where you feel you're replaceable. So part of it is the higher status gain frame. The loss frame is very much like, it's kind of a shame and blame thing. Like, if you're doing that, then question your value and worth. I think it's more like, I've seen cohorts just like yours come through year after year, and even if they didn't know their contribution, I eventually saw it, and I know it's there, and I want to teach you in a way where you do something that uniquely you can do, that a machine cannot. And I'm going to see that, and I care about you too much to let you only outsource all of your thinking to this, because I know your thinking is valuable, and we're worse off if we don't have it.
Next question from table 20. Do you have field-specific AI training for faculty, especially for faculty teaching creative disciplines?
Can you read that, Addie?
Do you have field-specific AI training for faculty, especially for faculty teaching creative disciplines?
Like us personally?
Good question. Table 20. Clarify.
Oh, does like SMU have
Yes.
resources for? I don't know.
Do you have, I guess I can answer as the CT, the Associate Director. Yes, I mean, for the past couple of years, and if you look at our annual report that should be in your inboxes if you already checked, we've had several workshops for faculty on AI. The SMU libraries also provide training on AI for faculty. OIT provides AI training for faculty. In fact, last week we've had some workshops on AI-assisted course design and some other tools, like Constantine led a session on how to look at your rate by professor reviews and make sure that you can clean up with AI. So we will continue putting out programming on AI. We can do department-specific trainings on AI. We can do one-on-one consultations with AI. So if you feel like you don't have support, you do, just contact me, atolliver@smu.edu or ct@smu.edu. We'll connect you with the people that can help you to achieve your goals and give you the best basic training. But for the past couple of years, since AI has, surfaced, we've been providing workshops, one-on-one trainings, and we've been thinking of designing an AI initiative, and a few people that were here were part of this committee. We have one representative per school to kind of figure out what this initiative is going to be. We were hoping to launch this fall, but we have so many other initiatives that we're launching, so we might postpone that to the spring. But I know that the libraries has an initiative coming up for faculty with AI. So there's always things going on. Just reach out to us. We can connect you with the best opportunity that can give you the support that you need.
Yeah, I was just going to add to that. We are thinking constantly about this. This is an ever-evolving issue, but with this new AI proposal that we're working on, the goal is that it gives you the flexibility where the training that you get makes sense within your area, rather than some generalized AI thing that is not as specific. So we're still working on the details. We have a very good draft, I think, but there's still more that needs to happen.
And what that committee also suggested is that we put together an SMU-specific database of actual uses of AI for pedagogical purposes, where you could go as a faculty member and go and search for, like, I'm in a creative field, or I'm in film. Like, what are other people in film doing with AI specifically in their classrooms? So that's part of what this initiative is going to be, and we're hopefully to launching it very, very soon. We just had too many other things, and it's just Constantine and I. So bear with us.
I wanted to add,
Yes.
each of the schools in the university have a technology officer. And one of the things I think that's been pretty smart about SMU IT is that those technology officers, particularly the one we have in Cox as an example, have really gone beyond being kind of the person who troubleshoots why your computer isn't working to being far more strategic about the use of technology. And so our AI person, or our tech person, Mike Elrisi, has become a really good resource on AI. And one of the things you might want to do within your own school is to find out who your tech officer is and to see to what degree that person may be able to act as a resource for you, particularly when it's more discipline specific. It can be very helpful.
Can I do one more addition to that? Like, yes, to all those trainings that exist. I will say my own personal experience and I guess bias on this would be, I think those can be a great starting point to learn what are the AI resources, what do they all, you know, if I'm in this field and trying to do this thing, which AI models may be better and more useful for me. I think when we get down to the level of like, and I'll also say for pedagogy, I think I've been to some good workshops and I think SMU has some good stuff on, here's how to think about using AI for helping to create learning objectives, for creating rubrics, for things like that. If you're a field specific thing, and I may be alone in this, I feel like you almost have to do it yourself because it's so specific to what you do. I'll say even in my department, if you ask everyone in our department, because we all teach different types of classes, what we are using it for and what it does well or doesn't, we would all give different answers because we're all doing different things, and somebody who's teaching screenwriting and wants to know how is it generating ideas versus someone who's doing, you know, I'll use an example. I was doing color grading and I'm like, oh, I wonder which of these AIs like can do stuff with color grading, what are their limitations, what are their strengths. There's not going to be an SMU workshop on that, and there shouldn't be, because that'd be a waste of everyone's time to do something that's useful in one class, right? But so I had to spend that time myself for the thing that's specific to my class. And the other reason I'll say I don't think you're ever going to get that fully from SMU in general is because it changes so fast. Like the color grading thing, I did it 2 months ago in preparation for a class. ChatGPT 5 came out and I tested things again, and my answers on what it could and couldn't do and what it did well and badly were drastically different, right? So if they had prepared, if you had taken that workshop even over the summer and then you came in this fall, what you learned in the workshop would have been wrong. So I think, unfortunately, it's on each of us to kind of keep up with that in our own fields and to keep up as these things keep changing. I mean, I know I remember when you could tell someone was AI generated because it had the wrong number of fingers, and gosh, that seems forever ago, but it was like earlier this year, right? And they've solved that now. And so I think whatever you learned last year, at least at this moment in terms of AI, is not going to be accurate anymore when you're thinking, what are its limitations, where am I adding value, and where are its shortcomings and where are they not?
We have one last question that's from table 7. At what point in the learning process of a discipline, skill, or topic is it most effective to incorporate AI? At what point in the learning process of a discipline, skill, or topic is it most effective to incorporate AI?
I think that's a false premise of a question. Like, there's ways it could be useful right at the intro. There's ways it could be useful in super advanced things, and it depends what you're doing and again what you're trying to get out of it. And I love the framework set up of where are you adding value? What is it doing? And as long as whatever you're using it for in that class is adding value to how the students are learning and it's helping them progress forward at that level, that can be valuable. But I don't know that it's inherently better for one level or the other.
I would say whenever you have control of the information, then those kinds of tools are helpful. And actually, I think of AI as not that different than a calculator or Grammarly or something like that. It's a tool that's telling you that what you are going to use is somehow weaker or something like that, or it's generating something and you're interacting with it. If you're able to tell that the grammar checker is putting the wrong comma in, or that it's making the mistake, then it's great to be using grammar checker. If you can't do that, you'll be introducing errors. If you are using AI to produce something where you cannot judge whether it's produced the correct thing or not, you should not be using AI. If you're using it to save time, I would use AI to do the dishes if I could, right? So I think it's when you don't have control of the material that it becomes problematic.
I tend to have a slight bias towards using AI in more advanced courses than foundational courses. I think there's something about people understanding foundations of a discipline and then having that background to be able to more accurately assess output. And I think that works more effectively at the elective level than it would at the foundational level.
I think it's a good research question, this question. So I'm on a lot of listservs, like learning engineering listservs, and with a lot of computer scientists and learning scientists who are making all kinds of claims. And there has never been a study, as far as I know, to show that an AI tool in a conventional higher education course has improved learning in terms of when it's measured later, does the person actually still know the skill after the course ended? Like the kind of learning you're trying to create in a class. There's just a bunch of claims. And like Google now has learner mode, right? And then there's all these other AI models that are coming out this fall, and they're promoting it in education. And on all these listservs, people are doing experiments, and it turns out that in learner mode, which is supposed to like quiz you, it's very easy to have it just give you the right answer. So even tools that are supposedly about being your Socratic pilot, guide, tutor, they're not tested or designed in ways that are like rigorously evaluated. They're not gated. So there's just a lot of claims that are unsupported, and there's a lot that's not known. Now, having said that, I think personally, what we're going to be using is we're going to be using NotebookLM in Google, where I'm loading my course content in there, and it's a gated environment, and it's not going to go outside of the content I'm loading. What's really nice about it is that you can say, generate a 20-minute podcast conversation about like the last 2 weeks of readings, and it'll do it, and it's amazing. Like if you fine-tune it with your content, it's incredible. And so we're taking the transcripts of all my former lectures, because we're all digital, so we've got the transcriptions and you've got the readings. So students can ask questions of a digital me rather than have to stop class and raise their hands. And they can have me have a conversation with their favorite author in a podcast, and it's automatic. And that stuff's incredible. What I really worry about is when it's like they're interacting live and chatting with it, because then it just goes off the rails and it can say stuff that's not true. But it's very good at summarizing stuff if you train it and it's not pulling from the whole internet.
This concludes our Al Schuler panel on teaching excellence. Let's give everybody a hand.